called, monsieur. Today, I want to say something about the 1.5 era of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. The books originally started out like this, and then in the 1.5 era, they gave them new covers, but they have orange spines here, and they're made much cheaper. They have a tendency to fall apart. And the first book to be published that way was this one, the Unearthed Arcana. When I play first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, I don't allow this book. This book will ruin your campaign. So let's see what's so bad about it. As I said, it has a tendency to fall apart. Cheap construction. Gary Gygax intended for these books to be a book for the ages. Many early printings of first edition are still in great shape, but when you get to 1.5, falling out pages is a hazard. So, we start with a change in there are a bunch of new classes and a bunch of new sub-races, or different races. So, one of the things I didn't like about first edition is if you had a high ability score, you could advance to a higher level than if you had a low one. But the ability scores in the player's handbook topped out at 18. Sure, dwarves could be a 19 constitution, and elves and halflings could have a 19 dexterity, but that was because they were a +1 on those. But they topped out at 18, and now dwarves top out at 21, and there are different kind of dwarves. Hill dwarves, mountain dwarves, gray dwarves, and they have different maximum levels for different ability scores. Elves. Well, let's go back to gnomes. Gnomes, they top out at 21 here. And then elves, there's a whole bunch of new kinds of elves. There's dark male elves, dark female elves, wild elves, gray elves, high elves, valley elves, wood elves. They top out at 21 for their ability scores, except magic users would top out at 22. So the power creep has already started here. Half-elves top out at 20. That makes them less attractive as a player choice. Halflings top out at 20, and it used to be that NPC halflings could be druids. Now player characters can, and they can be clerics too. Halflings used to not be able to be clerics. Half-orcs top out at 21, better than the 20 of halflings. So all these different new kinds of things. There's some new weapons, so the classes get more weapon choices now. And so there's some new class. And the first new class is the Cavalier, which wasn't really needed. It's a knight class, basically. Isn't that what the fighter is? The fighter was a generic warrior type who could be a knight or a barbarian or a samurai, whatever you want. But now there's a specialized class for knights. And one of the good things about this class is they don't start off at first level. They start off at 0 level, and they have to work their way up to being first level. So that's a good point. But paladins could be both paladin and cavalier and have all the benefits and drawbacks of both. This class was overpowered. And so, now druids. Druids traditionally topped out at 14th level, where he became the Great Druid. But now they've decided that the Great Druid is only the local Great Druid. There's also the Grand Druid who rules over all the little Great Druids. And after you get tired of being Grand Druid, then you can become a Hierophant Druid. And you get some elemental powers. I think this is a lame idea. Okay. In the Dragon, there was an article proposing something called a weapon specialist. And the idea was people were clamoring for an archer class, and this filled that niche, but it was written vague enough that you could make it a specialist in any weapon. But it was supposed to only be for fighters, not paladins or rangers, only fighters, only single class fighters, no multi-class fighters allowed. But this spread so that it became a thing for other classes later. And there was the barbarian class. The barbarian class in this book is not as good as the one that was in the Dragon. And if you have one, because of the rules, you can't have a magic user in the same party. So that's kind of lame. There's some rules to make. Tracking for rangers, more complicated because it was too easy, I guess. And thieves. There's a new thief class, a prestige class for thieves. After you're a 5th level thief, instead of becoming a 6th level thief, you can become a thief acrobat. And you get some new thief skills. Tightrope walking, pole vaulting, high jumping, broad jumping, tumbling to attack, evade, or avoid damage falling. And I thought that this was pretty lame. I ran one once, not that much fun. So there's some new equipment. So we have to give you a new list of damages and armor class adjustments for all these new weapons. And then we come to spells. There's some new spells. It's like double the number of cleric spells there used to be. Same with druids and magic users and illusionists. There's a lot of new spells. Some of these appear some of these are lame and useless, like ceremony, but others are useful and are still used today. And this is where they first appeared. Amongst those, invisibility to undead. Aid. Enthrall. Withdrawal is like a lower power version of Time Stop. Death Store. Here we are. Negative plane protection. Magical vestment. Imbue with spell ability. Spell immunity. There's also some druid spells. There's druid version of ceremony. Lame. Flame Blade. Goodberry is a very useful spell. It gives druids their own flavor. See, when you're a cleric and you cast Cure Light Wounds, you roll a d8, and that's how many hit points you heal. But you might not need a whole 8 points. You might roll low, you might roll high, and it's kind of wasteful. But the Goodberry spell, each time you cast it, you create 2d4 fresh berries. Each berry heals 1 hit point. So you can give the patient the exact number of berries they need to heal all their damage without giving them extra. And the berries last 1 day per level. So when you're a high level druid, you could be stocking up for a couple of weeks before you go into the dungeon, and you've got a big supply of these. Slow poison. Starshine was kind of an interesting spell, but it's 3rd level, which seems too high for a spell that makes light like a starlit sky. Moonbeam is, a little bit brighter light, But it's 5th level. Who would waste a 5th level spell on that? It's a pretty good spell, but not at 5th level. Live Oak allows you to create an artificial treant, transmute water to dust. Chain Staff basically allows you to create a magic item that can become your own treant. They introduced the idea of cantrips. This has appeared in the Dragon before that, and this was a variation of that. They're not as powerful as the 0 level spells from later editions, and the idea is that you could memorize 4 cantrips instead of 1 first level spell, which nobody was willing to do. But there's some new first level spells like Alarm, Armor, Grease, Melt. Mount really messed up my Stone Age campaign. Wizard Mark, Deep Pockets, Flaming Sphere, No Alignment, Melf's Acid Arrow, Tasha's Uncontrollable Hideous Laughter. You know, all these, this is their first appearance of all these spells. Vocalize, Melf's Minute Meteors, Secret Page, Sepia Snake Sigil, Windwall, Everard's Black Tentacles. Here it is. Otterluke's Resilient Sphere. Shout, Stone Skin. Chain Lightning. Contingency. Mordenkainen's Lucubration. Force Cage. Yeah, there's a good picture of Force Cage. Teleport without error. Energy Drain. Otterluke's Telekinetic Spear. The illusion spells, you know, there's some illusion cantrips for illusionists. And Chromatic Orb, which is like a lesser version of Chromatic Spray. There's Phantom Armor, which is kind of overpowered. Alter Self. But most of the illusion spells are not that great. And then after that, we have a section devoted to the Dungeon Masters. And the very first thing they have is this new system for rolling up attributes. You roll the stated number of dice and keep the best 3. So for strength, you roll 9d6 and keep the best 3. For intelligence, you roll 3d6 and keep what you got. Wisdom, 5d6. Dexterity, 7d6. Constitution, 8d6. Charisma, 6d6. And there's a new ability called Comeliness. Charisma was always about a mixture of appearance and your personality. And now they've separated appearance out as comeliness. I thought that was a stupid idea. Whoever wrote that didn't understand charisma as it was defined. But this is a good thing, is that there's a minimum hit points for first level. In the old days, often people would give you maximum hit points at first level, but this spells it out. There's a bit on some new equipment here. The spell explorations. There's new magic items, but nothing that really has sunk into the personality, into our consciousness. There's a section on non-human deities. Now, this ought to be in the Deities and Demigods book, not here in this book, with no pictures. No pictures of any of these deities here. But there is some pictures of the pole arms. Here's spears and lances, in case you don't know what those are. Here's pikes and a bunch of others. It gives you a picture for each of these pole arms that are in there, so you know what they look like. Because a lot of people didn't know what all these different things looked like. What the hell's a bill? Or a bill hook? I don't know. Well, this is what they look like. And I got a wedding invitation for some friends from back in the 90s. Okay. So there you have it. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Unearthed Arcana.